All right, so I'm here with Qaseem Shaikh. He's a CTO at Sendoso, which is a hot startup. Recently raised $40 million in their Series B. Welcome, Qaseem.
Thank you, Bob.
A long time ago, Qaseem and I used to work together as well, so I know Qaseem pretty well. And you've been an engineering leader for a long time. I would love to hear the story, like how you got started, what your background is a little bit, and how did you get to a point where you're the CTO of Sendoso, such a hot startup?
Yeah, I would say I've been lucky all through my life. I think what we did undergrad from Pakistan, which is where I was born and raised in the late 90s, wanted to do electrical engineering. My dad was a civil engineer and ended up doing computer science because that was the hot thing then. Came to the US to do my master's, ended up getting a job at Amazon as one of the first few engineers in AWS, where AWS was a startup within Amazon. Learned a ton there, helped build some of the foundation services to move on to build payment systems and inventory forecasting systems at Amazon. And as soon as I got my green card, I did what I always wanted to, which is come out to the Bay Area and work at startups. So I've been in the Bay for the last 10 years. Worked at some startups, successful startups like Climate Corp, Zenefits, others that were not as successful. But really, kind of just how I ended up at Sendoso is through just sheer luck and the experiences that I had through through the companies that I've been part of.
How old was AWS at the time that you started working there?
Yeah, I think AWS had started maybe less than a year ago. I want to say I was
That's cool.
among the first dozen or so people, right? The two services that we were in that had not launched that we worked on when I joined was S3 and EC2. Those were not launched yet.
Wow.
I think what existed was a catalog service, which was just an extension of something that already existed. So it was the early days.
That's really cool. So one of the things I always tell people that's like when I'm trying to like recruit is would you rather build the infrastructure from the ground up, or would you rather go maintain somebody else's infrastructure, right? Like, so at a certain scale, you go work at Facebook, like you're going to work on some other technology that somebody else built. But, if you go work at a startup, you sort of get that experience of building that infrastructure from the ground up, which sounds like what you did at AWS, which is really cool.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating. I think AWS started out as, a response to Amazon's own internal need. Like circa 2003, Amazon had a $70 or $80 million Q4 hardware spend. That for that time was just high, super high. And Bezos was like, we got to figure out how this virtualization concept can be applied to our own use case. And fast forward a couple of years, we built it for ourselves, and then kind of just open it to the rest of the world, and the rest is history.
Yeah, wow, that's super interesting. So that was like what year roughly? Like
this was 2004 through 2006-07.
Great, and then from there you transitioned into sort of more of a leadership type role.
Yeah. I mean, I became a lead in another team that I transitioned to from AWS called payments team. This was a team that was building a micropayment service similar to PayPal's, and effectively like a precursor to Stripe back in the day. It didn't quite go as well. It still exists, but I think that was my foray into kind of just leading a small team. About 12 or so years ago.
Yeah. Wow. So that's cool. And then, you and I worked together. We both ran large teams at Zenefits. And I guess since then we have sort of transitioned into like the next phase, which is now you're the CTO at a hot company. And how big is your team at this point?
60 people.
Wow. And where is everybody located?
So we've got a team, we've got a US team that's about, 8 or 10 people, and then the rest of the folks are in Lahore, Pakistan.
Okay. So you have people in different time zones,
Yeah.
how are you dealing with that? How are you handling that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think the thing that has helped us, from day one is that we started out with a remote team, right?
Yep.
Started out with our engineering based out of Lahore. Our first few kind of just employees at the company were out there. So I think we have had a muscle for you know communicating, planning, executing in a distributed environment. We rely a lot on async communication. We use tools that everybody knows and uses, like Slack and Jira and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, a lot. And yet I think there's a need for, I'd say every once in a while a regroup where you bring everybody together and we talk about the future, where we do a retrospective and go. But I'd say we rely a lot on tools and kind of just an understanding that people going to operate in their own time zones, and that if we could make this work, it will feel like Sendoso engineering would feel like we're operating 24/7 for 5 days of the week. Like if
Right.
we create this environment where the baton is being passed from one time zone to another, we're executing, we're producing a lot more, in a given period of time.
The sun never sets on the Sendoso engineering empire, is what you're telling
That's
me.
right. That's exactly right.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole remote thing. I mean, the remote thing generally is new to me. I mean, I try to. I generally try to keep engineers in the same room as much as possible. But now you're forced to. We're starting to do. I think one of the big problems is like kind of keeping the culture. Something that like where people feel included, or you can kind of just have that like ad hoc type conversation. And we're doing things like remote happy hours. I think everybody's doing that at this
Right.
point.
Yep.
You know, it's interesting. It's an interesting time that we're in, Qaseem.
100%. 100%. Never, I personally could never have imagined working from home for, I don't know how 8+ or how many weeks it's been.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, it's a very, very different time.
I mean, I kind of like it. I kind of like working from home. I mostly like working from home. I do think that when it comes to just being like around people, I miss that. Like I definitely miss the team and being sort of in a room together, and that's fun. But I also like really like the heads down or the sort of time that you get to just concentrate and put headphones on, which doesn't happen as much in that environment. So anyway, crazy times we're in. So tell me about how engineering works at Sendoso. Like, what are your values? How have you structured your team? How are you doing things that basically accelerate, this sort of like 24-hour cycle that you guys are on? Just tell me a little bit about Sendoso
Yeah.
engineering.
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with kind of just who we bring on and, what their motivations are and how we organize them and what we give them, get them to work on. And so like the way I think about kind of just engineering is, people, platform, and process. And so who we bring on to, what their motivations are to eventually what they work on and how they work on, what tools they use to essentially how they communicate, collaborate, and are effective. And so our values, to your point, like, and it's even for hiring, which is right at the beginning of this entire process, who we bring on and how they map to those values, the values of shared responsibility, right? Accountability to each other within the team. They're not accountable to me, right? So people who take ownership, right? People who, who take pride in their work, people, a team that has a focus on testing, on scalability.
Oh, I love testing.
Yeah, I think everybody says that. We
Yeah.
say too, and we are making strides towards that more than we have in the past. But making sure that that is a key, key like tenet for how we operate is absolutely important. So those are some of the values for the engineering team. I think in terms of just how we've structured the team there, teams are built around business functions, right? The way I think about our engineering teams and the platform, essentially just one-to-one mapping in what are the capabilities that the business needs from us, from engineering. What are the components that our customers expect in a platform like Sendoso? So there is a core foundational kind of just common shared services around authentication, authorization, user management. There's a core piece around managing money. How does money come into the system? How it gets dispersed, to how data is managed. That is kind of the platform. And then we've got teams, end-to-end functional teams around experiences, right? So there's a team around sending. Sendoso is a sending platform. So their KPI is sender happiness. We've got a recipient experience team. We've got a back office team. So long story short, it's basically mapped around I'd say this concept of teams that own their own destiny, teams that as Bezos would say, two pizza teams.
Okay, let me switch gears for a second. I want to know what it's like to be a Series B CTO at this point. What is the hardest thing about your job?
It is prioritization. I mean, I'd say 3 months ago, it was recruiting.
Okay.
That changed a lot.
Yeah.
I think since we've made, significant progress. Right now, there's so much. I mean, it was always the case, but there is now so much more we could do that is time relevant. That we find ourselves having, hard discussions on what we should do and what we shouldn't do.
Yeah. You've got to balance. And the other thing you have to do is you have to sort of trade off between, sometimes you might need to get to market quickly, right? And so you sort of have to trade off between, let's call it speed and quality. And then, what I like to say is there's hacks, and then there's trade-offs. Hacks are sort of like, this unplanned, it's basically like getting something done really quickly without foreseeing what will be the downstream effects, right? Whereas trade-offs are like, you're sort of, that what you're building is not perfect, but you understand where it's not perfect and you understand what you're getting yourself into. And I think that, I try to avoid hacks. I try to go with trade-offs. You have to make trade-offs. You can't always build everything to, the nth degree. How do you go about figuring out what is a hack or a trade-off, or how you're going to prioritize what you're doing?
That's $1 million question. I think it's in short, I think making sure that we are not incurring additional tech debt without a reason, right? And as we are building new products, as we are adding new capabilities to the platform, that we leave our system better than how we started.
Mm-hmm.
And so incrementally paying off prior debt, not taking on additional debt without having a plan for addressing that debt, right? Having a future where we follow through after V1 on what we were going to do to evolve, let's say the data model or the tool that we used, or add the additional kind of internal admin capabilities. So I think just following through when we incur tech debt, but more importantly, as we build anything, just tackle prior tech debt as we go.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that, we don't have any tech debt internal. Nobody, yeah, of course not. No, I mean, one of the things that that I try to do is just make sure that we have test coverage. Like in the worst case, if I know if we're going to throw something together quickly, just make sure it's covered with tests, because otherwise you cannot safely refactor things. I'm a huge TDD proponent, and a long time ago, I wrote a test framework because I feel like everybody has to write a test framework at least once. I don't know why. There were perfectly other good test frameworks out there, but I had to write my own. So, I like to sort of like make sure that we have coverage as much as possible on things that I think we're throwing together quickly. But balancing the whole tech debt. Another thing that I think that doesn't really work well most of the time. Sometimes it works, but engineer comes up to you and says, "We need to rewrite the publisher. We need to rewrite this. It's just messy." And then they go off and it's like 3 months later, it's rewritten but doesn't quite work. Like, do you have that? Do you ever have you encountered that?
I mean, for sure in the past, I think, you just keeping an eye first on, kind of just knowing who's on the team and what their proclivities, what their, kind of just tendencies are. I think certainly staying on top of the current state of the system. So I think what I do is, I actually, like, there's an hour I have at the end of the day every day where I look at PRs. And it's usually, it takes more than an hour. So I'm in the code, I'm looking at our, design patterns, I'm looking at testing, I'm, just reminding people to, just be conscious of it, so that when there is a conversation, hey, we need to go rebuild publisher, that I'm informed and I can have that, conversation. So when it happens, I ask why, and I ask for data, and I ask for impact, right? And I ask for, what our solution is, right? Or what are the alternatives, right? And kind of just work with them to help the team figure out whether or not we should take this on, right? Because in the end, especially for a company that is, growing quickly, and that company that has to build a lot, there's an opportunity cost to doing everything, right? That
Totally.
3 months rebuilding the publisher, what else could we have done, right? If absolutely, that's one of the things we got to do. My team will find me supporting them, in my time, guidance, budget, resources, however I could. But I need to be convinced why it needs to be rebuilt.
Yep. There's always an opportunity cost. I mean, it's kind of why we started internal.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't want to build your internal tools. The opportunity cost is that you're not working on your core product, which is the thing that generally generates revenue. So totally get it. Also, at like just an early stage startup, that opportunity cost is very high. If you build, the next great widget, the next great Facebook killer app or whatever, that has huge ROI downstream. So I get it. The thing I've got to ask you is, are you still writing code? What's going on?
I am. Yeah.
Nice.
I say it's not as much as I would like to.
Yeah.
But I do get in there, for some of the core pieces. Yeah, I jump in and, contribute.
I think the worst thing about being an engineering leader is the reason why you got into engineering in the first place was because you liked writing code. I mean, at least that's how it was for me. And then you find yourself doing not those things anymore, which is, it's all trade-offs, right, Qaseem?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that's why I got into this in the first place. And yet I think, helping kind of just build a platform and a, team and a business, I think is also exciting. So while one side of me feels like I'm missing out on things, I look at, the impact that you and I could have in our roles is what keeps me happy.
Yeah, there was a talk a long time ago. I went to GoGo Ruco, and the guy giving the talk had MS actually, and he was kind of just talking about how, and he authored several very popular open source Ruby libraries, and he gave this talk that I think really changed how I thought about things, which was it was really about how hard it is for him to actually write code. And when he does, he has to make a very conscious decision to do so. But he would much rather prefer to leverage other people to help him accomplish his goals. And it sort of like turned into this like conversation about like, you know, working with other people to make a bigger impact. And I
Mm,
think that's kind of like how things have evolved, at least for me in my career. I mean, I was always very much an IC, like just I want to get dirty with the code. And then at a certain point, something just kind of clicked. And I think I was like, well, now I kind of care a little bit more about, instead of being the best engineer, I want to be like, make the biggest impact. And if you're
mm,
going to make the biggest impact, how are you going to do that? And you sort of have to just work with people, and it becomes more of a collaborative function. And I think that was just like a natural evolution. Um, but anyway, this interview isn't about me. Did you have a moment like that where you sort of realize, oh wait, like I don't want to be the best engineer anymore, or maybe you still do? I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I think I did have that moment. I'd say the first startup I was part of, grew very, very quickly as well. We went from when I joined, I think it was a dozen people. When I left 4.5 years later, it was 500 people. So it was at that startup in one of our sort of initial growth, spurts that I got thrusted into. Like now you have this team, right? You have three engineers. You got to go manage the work of, and you got to plan and execute and deliver high quality software on time, under budget, right? And so it started there, and I loved writing code, but I also saw, first up, I struggled kind of to manage other people, but then it
Yeah.
learned through coaching, mentorship, help, I think got a little bit better, and realized that I could, as you said, I could have a much larger impact, right? I can tie, technology and code and systems to outcomes, right? To business outcomes, right? I can help connect, marketing, sales, success, support, right? Exec function, our board, and engineering, be that bridge. And over time, kind of just because of the opportunities, scale to having more and more responsibility, to I am where I am today.
Yeah. Oh, it's been a journey, that's for sure. So I gotta also talk to you a little bit about accelerating your team, and like that's what we're trying to do at Internal. We're all about accelerating teams. Are there any sort of maybe tips or tricks you can give people to sort of get more? Especially now, I guess, with the whole COVID thing, sort of like do more with less. Like, how are you doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I think about that is how I can enable my team to be more effective. And the way I do that is by taking away all of the unnecessary things that they would otherwise have to do. So there no or very less bureaucracy, right?
Right.
Enablement, empowerment, kind of just these high, just high sounding words, or concepts, but really just making sure we hire the right people. I mean, that
Yeah.
again, it goes back to everything I like, people who are functionally competent, people who have the right motivations, people who would work well together, right? Those three kind of, things, if they exist, I kind of let them run with stuff, right? And
Right.
so I'm there to enable them, to support them. And I know, they're going to, like, certainly there are projects that they can work on that are business impacting, but if they bring up something, that I let them execute on. And
Right.
so me not getting in the way of people doing great things, is how I think let them be happy, how I let our organization achieve more with less.
I think that's fantastic advice. At the end of the day, it comes down to, like, I think people, right? I mean, we are all just people at the end of the day. But it's trust. It's like if you hire people that you can trust, and you sort of give them the right context to operate in, they're going to make the right micro decisions, and you can kind of
100%.
get out of their way, which is how you actually achieve throughput. I got to be honest. I didn't see myself doing an interview talking about management ever in my life, but this has been really good and insightful. And I just want to say thank you for coming and doing this and participating in this process. So thank you, Qaseem. Really appreciate you and your contribution.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's always fun talking to you, Bob. So happy to talk again ever. And I'd love to get the opportunity to ask similar questions to you, because I'm sure you have, you have an amazing background, and you'll have a lot more to share as well.
Thank you, sir. All right. Stay
Okay.
healthy.
You too.
All right. Bye.